So, good day, mate.
Good day, mate. How are you?
Fair dinkum.
Fair dinkum, yeah.
So, as Bill, we were talking about earlier on the phone today, and I want to make this point to people listening here because it seems like we got quite a few listening already. Whoever lives longest writes history, and the history of our profession is not being told in full. You can go to the local Walmart and buy a DVD right now, and I'm going to save that for a whole nother week and maybe even next week. And, there's history being told that is not exactly true. And one of the things that I think is sad for the people that are coming up in the sport of wrestling now, they don't care to learn the history. They don't care to know what came before them or who came before them, but I do. I grew up here in East Tennessee, a lifelong wrestling fan. I got to see Memphis wrestling, Mid-Atlantic wrestling, Knoxville wrestling. Started trading tapes when I was a kid in the back of the magazines to see wrestling from other parts of the country. And just here, probably 2 years ago, I came across some DVDs from Australia, and it's taken me some time to get them switched over to where we can watch them in our machines here. But I have absolutely fell in love with Jim Barnett's WCW promotion in Australia, and I'm shocked that a lot of fans do not know the history of it. They do not know that there was a WCW there. It was not on Georgia TV first. It was actually on Channel 9 in Australia first.
Yes, it was.
And you started, I'm going to give a little history here. You were born in Scotland, so you saw the world of sport from England.
Yeah.
Before you went to Australia, correct?
Yeah, and they used to do wrestling every Saturday afternoon in Britain from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock on Saturday afternoon with the Billy Robinsons, Tony Charles, Adrian Street started, Jackie Paulo, Mick McManus, and all them guys. So that was who I first grew up watching, and were wrestling then. I mean, the kicking and the gouging, we learned that in Memphis, Tennessee. But anyway, we did more wrestling there, and they did more wrestling in Australia. So
when you got to Australia and you first started, there was no wrestling on TV in Australia. Is that correct?
Not the way that it came when Barnett got it. Hal Morgan had a little wrestling show in Sydney, Australia, where he used to do in the leagues clubs, and I had to wrestle there. Kenny Medlin, Larry O'Day, Ron Miller, they all were starting there, and I was living in Melbourne. So after Barnett came in 1964, I got working for him, and then he suggested I should move to Sydney and work for Hal Morgan in the clubs because he used a lot of Morgan's boys, and he liked me, and he said, you'll learn a lot up there wrestling-wise. So I moved to Sydney and learned in the clubs, and that's where I met George Barnes.
When Barnett, and people who do not know Jim Barnett, and we're not going to get into personal lives or any of that, and I just want to talk about the promoter, Jim Barnett, who he had owned a little piece of Indianapolis territory, I believe, or maybe owned it in full before he came to Australia. Did most of the Australian boys know anything about Barnett before he got to Sydney?
No. Jim Barnett and Johnny Doyle was the promoters. They showed up, and one would stay 6 months, and then he'd go home, and the other one would stay 6 months, and he'd go home. Barnett's booking style, or the way he booked, was a little different from Doyle. Doyle used a smaller crew, and when I didn't know nothing about booking then, but I would say, well, Johnny Doyle uses 10 guys where Barnett uses 20 guys. But apparently it was easier to book with the 20 guys, and I learned that when I come to Memphis because Lawler used to book like that. He'd bring 30 guys in, and when we did it, we had 15 maybe. But anyway, that's how the styles were different.
Now, Australia, when you started in Australia, it was a little different. They wrestled in lounge like they did in Europe. So yeah, when the Americans first came there, and I was watching Gorgeous George a little bit this afternoon wrestling in Australia, and it seemed that some of the Americans could adapt to that style, but some of them seemed to have trouble with it. They kind of got lost in the flow of the match with the round stopping every 3 minutes.
Yeah, and then if you had the guy down or whatever way you did it, it was a lot easier to get heat with the rounds, but it was, Barnett didn't like it when he got, so he changed it. No rounds after Barnett got here.
Now, did that take the fans, did they like that or dislike that? I guess it was kind of all new because all of a sudden wrestling had went from the clubs and the casinos of Australia to being in the big arenas, the big halls, and Channel 9 television, which I guess that would be compared like here a superstation. Channel 9 went across the country, covered most of the country.
Yeah, well, yeah, but it was different. Like it was just like the TVs we did here. It would be like Channel 9 in Melbourne, Channel 7 in Sydney, or whatever it was in Brisbane, and the ones, yeah, but it wasn't cable TV. It was just different TV stations. They just bicycled the tape, and then sometimes they made live shows in every town. They made a live show in Brisbane, they made a live show in Sydney, and they made a live show in Melbourne, and they bicycled that around the rest of the country.
So what was the buzz like when Barnett and them got there? What was the buzz among the local Australian wrestlers? Did they think, well, we're going to be shut out, or this is our opportunity for a big break, or how did you and George Barnes look at it?
Well, by the time we was kind of working for Hal Morgan, and Hal Morgan had made a deal with Barnett to supply him the jabrones for every TV show, so whatever the enhancement guys they call them now. So we kind of knew our role, but Barnett was paying us $35 a match, a TV show or a live show. You got $35. Guys were working $40 a week for $35 back in the 60s, so we thought, Christ, we're millionaires, so we didn't care. Book it and pay us.
That's it. Pay me.
Yeah.
So it was, now, the one thing, and I watched the documentary that Larry O'Day and some of them did on the Australian, and King Curtis said this at the end of the documentary. He said the only fault that he had in Australia, which he was there for a long time and had a long run there and absolutely loved it there. He said, but the only fault that he thought to the territory was Australian fans did not want to see Australian wrestlers. They wanted to see Americans and Japanese and Greeks and Italians. They wanted to see people from all around the world. Do you think in the long run that hurt when they were not able to bring the talent in from different countries?
Well, here's the thing about Australia. Australia was the melting pot of the world long before America ever got the way it got, because there was Greek people. You know, you had to be white to live there back then, so it was all Caucasian, you may say. But there was Greeks, Italians, Germans that were all European and all that type of thing. And the Aussies never really was interested. That's fucking bullshit, mate, and they wouldn't watch it. So an Australian guy getting over it was a little hard for, you know what I mean? But the Italians and the Greeks and all the other people, they loved the wrestling, so they were the ones that was supporting it. So I think that's why they brought all the Spiros Arenes in, the Mario Milanos, the Italians and the Greeks and the Germans and everything else, because there was a lot of them people there. And the Aussies just never really supported it. It was hard to get over type thing. But Larry O'Day and Ron Miller, when Barnett started pushing them, they did get over.
Do you think that was, because I can remember seeing them here in America when I was a kid, do you think that was because they came to America and went back? Or you know, they were kind of looked as heroes as they conquered the world and they went away and now they've come back are big heroes of Australia?
A little bit of both, but Barnett used to have the thing too. The locals don't get over. He never, you know what I mean? They used to say you can't draw in music and you live there, but Elvis did it when he went back to the Coliseum. He sold out every time he went. So that is a bullshit story. But they had it in the wrestling business same way. They said, well, local guys don't draw. Barry Lawler drew in Memphis.
Ron Wright and Don Wright and Whitey Caldwell here in East Tennessee. Set records,
to answer your question, I think Barnett had about as much doing with that, saying, well, the locals just don't draw. He didn't want to push a local, because if you get somebody over that's living there and they want to, well, and you know how the territories were back then, people were stealing them from one another, that you could get them out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're going to be opposition to you if you get them over too strong. Yeah.
Right, and Hal Morgan was that type of guy. Believe me, Hal Morgan was a tough son of a bitch.
Yeah. So how for like guys like you and Ron Miller and O'Day and George Barnes, who you guys had worked the Australian circuit, and all of a sudden you're wrestling guys from all over the world, from Dominic DiNucci from Italy, and Bobby Shane came there from America, and I mean just a who's who of wrestling went through Australia. I mean Dominic DiNucci to Andre the Giant to Jack Briscoe, to Harley Race, to Abdullah the Butcher, to, I mean, we could sit here and name names for 2 hours. King Curtis, Big Bad John, Killer Carl Cox, all those guys went there. So you guys kind of had, all of a sudden, to me it seemed like you had every great teacher in this profession at your doorstep overnight.
Right.
So,
but there was a lot of the guys
go ahead.
There was a lot of the boys just like they are here today. If you didn't really go to them and ask them, what do you do right, what do you do wrong, pay attention to this, pay attention to that, they never just came and offered it. But me, Barnes, and a few of the guys that wanted to learn this business from the inside out, we went and asked, hey, why did you do this? Why did you do that? So they would have kind of teach it to you. And it's the same thing here. Most kids in the wrestling business think they're the only ones in it. And if you go and offer your advice to them, they look at you like you're stupid. But, it's just monkey see, monkey do. They watch Vince. They think that's what you did. But that wasn't what we did back in the good old days.
And like you said, too, here was one thing. All those Australian guys, all of you could wrestle. Y'all were taught how to wrestle. And right. I mean, not what America called wrestling. You guys knew it. And just same thing with the English guys and the German guys. You knew how to get down on the mat. You knew how to hook and shoot and go. And, was that a big difference? Because I would imagine there was not a lot of gimmicks and not a lot of, showmanship in Australian wrestling before Barnett got there.
No, you're absolutely right. Everybody wrestled. There were all-round match. There was a 3-round match, a 4-round match, and a 6-round match, and that was the main event. There was usually 3 matches on the club circuit cards. But there would be 10 clubs one night running, so you could do the first match in one club and get in your car and drive to another one 10, 15 miles away and do the main event. So there was a lot of wrestling, but it was all the same. There was no real gimmicks. There was nothing. We had a guy named Reinhard Molotov. He wrestled in Germany. He made the German Olympic team, 2 big cauliflower ears, and he was over. So he was a kind of a gimmick just because he was a wrestler, and he looked like a wrestler. Cauliflower ears and a punched-in nose, all that. But most of them, there was no gimmicks.
So, and literally overnight from that to Gorgeous George appears with Barnett in Australia, which I was watching today, and it was weird as Jack Little did the introduction and George walked to the ring, the building was dead silent as people looked at George, and it's funny, I'm going to give these to our friend to bring to you, these DVDs, but the way the Australian fans looked at Gorgeous George, like, what in the world is this guy? But in a matter of 2 minutes, once he started wrestling, they got with it. But the first few minutes of watching him prance around the ring, they had no idea what they were seeing.
No, because they had never really seen it before. And, and then was that senior or junior that you was watching?
That was senior. Yeah, that was one of his, towards the end of his career.
Yeah, and then junior before all that. But we had a guy in Australia that kind of copied the same thing, Murphy the Surfy.
Yep, Murphy the
Barnett
Surfy.
kind of give him that gimmick, but it was a watered-down version of Gorgeous George. But then Murph came over here as one of the Australian Kangaroos. Him and Jonathan Boyd showed up here as the Royal Kangaroos. But he could wrestle too. But when he was Murph the Surf, he pranced around in pink tights and all the same stuff, and he started to get over. So the gimmicks. Barnett brought all the gimmicks, or most of the gimmicks, to Australia.
Yeah. And also one thing, you had guys like Ox Baker and Abdullah the Butcher and Big Bad John, and when they're slugging and punching and kicking, there's one thing there where they tie Mark Lewin in the ropes and go to beating on him, and people are literally, it's almost a riot, and that all had to be new. They'd never seen the blood from the guts of Southern wrestling brought to Australia, and it was kind of, I guess, a culture shock for the wrestling fans.
Right, but Mark Lewin was a hell of a babyface. He was a good-looking guy. He was 6'1" or 2" and 250 pounds in shape, and the son of a gun was over like and he could sell. And that's what the kids today don't seem to realize. That when they pounded on him, he looked like you were killing him.
Yeah, and he had great speaking voice when he did his interviews. People listened to him, and he just, all that. Why do you think they brought American announcers? Just for the fact that they knew they would, like Sam Maneker and Jack Little, they knew they would get over what they needed instead of using an Australian announcer, who I guess it would be all foreign to him if he's never seen American wrestling trying to call an hour worth of matches on TV.
Right. Well, you said at the beginning when you said Barnett came from Minneapolis or wherever, was Sam Menaker was his announcer there, so he brought Sam to Australia with him to get it kicked off. But Jack Little was an American announcer living in Australia, so when Sam left, Jack took over and he became the voice of Australian wrestling, just like Gordon Soley here or Lance Russell in Memphis.
Yeah, that's the name that I see all the time listed when people talk about the Channel 9 wrestling and whatever other wrestling there, WCW in Australia. Jack Little's name comes up. So when you started, did you realize that, hey, this thing, did you know right away when he got there and started running, did you know this is getting ready to take off and become what it became? Or did they struggle a little bit at the beginning, or once they hit the TV, it was off to the races?
Well, they came to the TV first, and then they got the TV over, and then they did the first live event. They had it on television, and they weren't really wrestling nowhere. Then it was about 2 months or something, and they did the first live show, and the place was on fire. But I think us local guys, we looked at it the same way everybody looked at Vince McMahon when he did his first WrestleMania. Said, "Oh, this bullshit won't last 2 years." Well, Vince is working on his 30th, and Barnett was there for 10, and he sold it out to Tony Coloni, so it stayed around for about 20 years.
Yeah.
So, it was all new to us, and we thought, this ain't going nowhere, but it did.
Oh. And when he got there, now you were wrestling every weekend, but were you wrestling through the week, too, before Barnett got there, or was it...
No, they did spot shows. They
okay.
Sunday morning was Melbourne TV. The next Saturday was the Melbourne show, and then Friday night was Nashville. Saturday morning was Sydney TV. And then you got on an airplane and you flew from Sydney to Melbourne, and you did the show that night. And everybody stayed over in Melbourne, and you did the Melbourne TV. Then you may do a spot show at Geelong on the Monday, or you go over to Adelaide for the Tuesday, up to Brisbane for the Wednesday, Thursday morning, Brisbane TV. Then after that, you went to a spot show, then you was back in Sydney. So they did the same shit that we did in a car, they did in an airplane. You had to fly.
Well, I got the map out and looked at the towns, and, I mean, Australia and America is not much different in the land size. And they were going coast to coast. I mean, from Sydney across to Perth, and I mean, there was no way you could have drove those towns. But those guys were jet setters at the time. They were doing in the early '60s in Australia what I guess WWE does now. You know, different side of the country every night and different parts of the country, and they were not just one area star. They were captivating the whole country.
Right, and then Barnett had some of them got booked in Singapore, and Barnett had hooked up with Singapore, so some of the guys would go over there, then he would bring them back. I mean, they were kind of running that end of the world.
Yeah. Barnett is a promoter, and I've talked to Bobby Simmons, who worked in the office in Atlanta, many times about Barnett, and I've heard you talk about him and a lot of other people. And, you know, he's one guy that some people don't like, but a lot of people just absolutely think the world of him. But as a promoter, that guy was way ahead of his time.
Oh, yeah.
He had a vision and seemed to understand what television meant and how big it could be and what he could do with it.
And he had the same outlook on Ted Turner. He didn't really have to know nothing about wrestling parts, say, getting in the ring and do it. He just had the knack of hiring the people that could get in the ring and do it, and Mark Loon as the booker. And he had that knack like Ted Turner did. And he would tell you, I don't know nothing about being in the wrestling ring, but I know what I like to see, and I know how it should look on television. And he did, and so did Barnett.
Barnett, when he came in, was it 63 or 64 he came to Australia?
I think 64.
Okay, and he stayed, like you said, I guess 10 years. And then, do you think if he stayed in Australia and didn't sell out, do you think it would have lasted much longer? Do you think that, you know, it went, like you said, it went 20 years, but do you think it could have became even bigger and ran longer than the 20 years that it lasted?
Yeah, but then, see, Larry O'Day and Ron Miller was starting to get a little bit into the political part of that. I mean, they wanted to have something, too, so he sold out to Tony Coloni, and Tony Coloni brought Bobby Shane in as the booker, That's how we got here in '75, because Shane liked me and Barnes. And then, you know, he was starting to get the, what would you say, opposition, like you said earlier. The opposition was starting to come along from Miller and O'Day, because they were the big stars of the locals, Larry O'Day and Ron Miller. And Barnes hated Larry O'Day, but that's another story. But anyway, so you know, so they were starting to raise their heads. So I think Barnett just said, "The hell with it," and sold out.
Yeah, I saw Barnett as a kid when he came to Memphis, and with you, and you know, really sitting and watching this Australian stuff, I have become a huge fan of George Barnes. And I believe that guy, if he would have stayed in America, I believe he would have been just as successful as you were. You know, I believe he could have been a top heel just about anywhere he went from just watching his work. And he was one of those guys, when you watch him, the way he walks, the way he carries himself, the way he handles himself in the ring, the way he talks, everything about him is believable, because it's no gimmick. That's George Barnes. From your stories that I've heard, and then watching him on TV, and I've become just, man, what a great hand he was in the ring. What a great performer and wrestler. And, you know, I think if he would have stayed here now, I wish he would have stayed longer, just for now we've got that what if. What if he would have stayed longer?
Right. Well, here was really the deal that me and Barnes come here. Bobby Shane got us booked here. He called on the phone and talked to Jerry Jarrett from the hotel room the day he said, "I can get you booked in America." I said, "Bobby, we've had that from 20 Americans and we're not there yet." He said, "I can do it. Jerry Jarrett's a friend of mine and he works for Nick Gullis. They would love you in Tennessee. I can get it." So he went right there and got the time difference, and we called. So he called to Jarrett at the beginning of about 74, and it took to 75 to get all the papers in order. But anyway, so we came here knowing that Shane was coming back to take the book in Florida, and we was going to go, if it didn't work out in Memphis or we stayed and we're running Memphis, then we was going to Florida with him. But it was in the plane wreck, and he got killed in the plane wreck, and that shot that all to hell. George was having problems with his wife being over there and his girlfriend or whatever the hell at the time. And he said, "Look, man, I'm just going home." He was kind of upset that Bobby got killed and all that type thing. Me too, but I had made up my mind when I came here, I'm coming to stay. Sink or swim, it's going to make it. I know I can do this as good as anybody else, so I'm going to give it a shot. So anyway, George went home to switch me, and the rest is history. But you're right. But we had that. If Bobby Shane hadn't been killed, we would have ended up in Florida.
Yeah, I believe you guys would have did well there. I think you could have done great in Portland, because Portland was a smaller guy territory like Tennessee kind of was. And, you know, I think just different places the two of you could have went. I really like George Barnes' watching his work. Also, Australia. Let me say this, Bill, we're going to go over, so if you're listening live, which many people are, just come back and listen to the last 15 minutes archives, because I want to keep talking to Bill about Australian wrestling here on Do You Want to Be a Wrestler Kid Radio. Bill, do you think, guys, why do you think 20 Americans told you we'll get you booked in America, but they never did?
Well, I mean, some of them they would do the old thing when they would leave them. Well, I'll go talk to this guy, I'll talk to that guy, blah, blah, blah. You know how they are. They're kind of like today, people will tell you bullshit that ain't, well, hey, I can get you in Hollywood. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, we'll get me in films, right? Yeah, whatever. People say shit that you don't, you know. But Bobby Shane was the one, the day he said it, well, he said it a couple of times or 3 times, and he said, well, when we get to the hotel this weekend in Melbourne, we're going to get the time difference, and I'm calling Jerry. And he did it right then, that day, got through. And it was all set up then, and then the rest was history. Nick Gullis got the papers and all that kind of thing. Took about a year to do it right. I guess if you're in Mexico, you just get in your car and drive over. But anyway, another story, right?
So when how did you give a notice in Australia? I mean, how far ahead did you know that you were coming to America? To let them know, hey, we're getting ready to leave, and you know.
Well, but the same once they got the papers done, once Shane got them all started, and we knew about a month before. I mean, they were done, blah blah. So it was about 4 weeks by the time, because you have to take care of your personal shit, your family, your wrestling,
right,
all the things you're going to do. So, yeah. So it was about a month, I guess.
And you look at that, there was, how many of you guys, it was you, Barnes, Gray, O'Day, there was 5 or 6 of you that came here from Australia. But look at the amount of guys that moved from America to Australia. I mean, there was endless Americans and Canadians and Englishmen that went to Australia there and had to pack up and move. And like you said, you can't just drive there. You know, they either had to fly or you know, go without their families or move their families later. But, you know, that was a big commitment and a big chance to go around the world just to wrestle, as some people would look at it. They didn't look at it as an opportunity to make some good money, make a living. But when you came after meeting all those guys there, how many of them were in Tennessee when you first came here?
There really wasn't. What the hell? There was an Italian here. What the hell is his name? I can't say. It's not awful. Anyway, there was one Italian guy that lived in Nashville. He came over there, and Mario Milano had been for Nick, so he kind of told us how that was. And everything he said was true too. You know how Nick is. But anyway, I can knock Nick in one way, but it hadn't been for Nick. He signed the papers. He got us here. He got us all over here. And Christine Jarrett got me the green card and all that kind of stuff when we so I could be here forever. So yeah, all the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the indifference, it all just worked out, and here we are.
Yeah. Well, was there anything in Australia? I mean, when you were there working, did you know, okay, I'm not going to get pushed, you know, above the Americans here? So was that your reasoning of leaving to make it to be a top guy, where a lot of guys would have just sat in Australia and just said, hey, I'm happy here? Like you said, they were making more in one night than most people working 40 hours a week. So, I mean, a lot of guys, I guess, would be content with that. Why leave home when you're making money?
Yeah, but I guess you have that sparkle thing. Do you think you could make it? I mean, most of the reason maybe I went because they kept telling me I was too small. You've heard that story 100 times. Yeah. Everybody said, oh, you're a hell of a worker's kid, but you're too small. I said, well, the hell were you? And they can't all be 7 feet tall in America, so, and that's true, they ain't. But no. Barnett just brought the monsters over, the Brute Bernards, the, Skull Murphys, Mario Milano, Mark Lewin, Curtis Ark. All them guys were 6 feet or better.
And ugly. That was ugly. Boy, he had the ugliest heels in the world.
Yes, he did. The ugliest heel he ever told me. This is a funny story, and it was Barnett, and you have to know how he talked. Oh, my God, that boy's just ugly. You know how he talked. He thought Fargo and Tojo was the ugliest team he had ever seen. When Jerry Jarrett took him down to Atlanta when he worked for Jim, when he booked down there, he said, oh, my God, Jerry, they are just ugly. You know how he was. But anyway, I loved old Jim.
I mean, you look like you said, all those monsters, Curtis I.K. and Ox Baker and Brute Bernard and Carl Cox and the Tojo that they had there, Abdullah the Butcher. I mean, that's a motley crew that looks like they'd kill you for a quarter,
Yeah.
And people, you can see it on the Australian stuff I've watched, man. When they hit the floor, the people scatter. I mean, they're scared of them. You don't see that anymore now.
No, and the baby faces, you had Mark Lewin, good-looking guy. His name will tell you what he is. He's Jewish, Mark Lewin. He had Mario Milano, good-looking Italian. Spiros Orion, good-looking Greek guy. He had all the baby faces the way they should be, representing the people that lived in Australia. And they all came out to see him at every show we was on.
And that's, one of the things that, like I said about Mad Dog Vachon at the beginning here, we lost him today, but those characters, they weren't characters. They were really the people. Brute Bernard was really that ugly. Mad Dog Vachon was really that rough. And that's something that's missing now, because those guys weren't a character. They weren't, they had a gimmick playing. It was just a little bit, their self turned up just a little bit higher. And I think that's a big thing that misses today. Everybody looks the same. And I was watching that, Jack Briscoe, when he was on this, going to Australia, when he went to the ring, and they're talking about his Native American Indian heritage, and he's got that long black hair. And, people were swooning over him. They'd never seen a guy like that. Like you said with Lewin and all these other guys. Of course, you got a good-looking guy in there. All of them were young men, too, at the time, getting beat up by bald-headed Germans and Japanese and wild men from Sudan, and the blood's flowing. Of course, people's going to get excited, and they're going to believe in it and want to see it.
See, here's the thing at Barnett, because he was in that era. He had a heel team, or a heel that was part of what we was mad at. When we was mad at the Germans, he had a German team. When he's mad at the Saudi Arabians, he had so he had the characters, which were characters, but they were real people at the same time. When he brought Skull Murphy and Brute Bernard over, that was the darndest team I thought I'd ever seen together. Now, let me tell you a funny story about Brute Bernard. After Skull he died or whatever, and Brute came back as a single, me and him were good buddies, and he loved George Barnes, so he would come to my house. So Jamie was about, 4 years old. So anyway, me and Brute at the house were drinking, so he said, "Where's the boy? Where's the boy?" And that's how he talked. I said, "He's in the bathroom." I said, "He's having a bath." I go bath him. And he goes in there, and he's fucking splashed water all over Jake. By the time they got out of that bathroom, I thought Beverly was going to kill us all. Brute Bernard had splashed more water on Jamie all over him. He had him saying, the kid, I like the kid, blah, blah. He was missing his kids at home, I guess. But the point I'm making is the character that the people saw on television every Saturday and Sunday morning was nothing like that man as far as when he was just, being Jim. His real name was Jim Barnett. But anyway, the Brute was, the character. But he loved kids, and him and Jamie from that day on, big buddies.
Yeah, and that guy had a great career. I mean, he worked everywhere, all over the world, and
yes,
that's the thing too. I mean, you take a young guy like Briscoe was a young kid when he went to Australia, but he was working every night with the Super Bowl team that Jim Barnett had put together. You and Barnes and O'Day and all those guys, all of a sudden you went from working each other in the circuit to you had some of the greatest hands in the wrestling profession in the ring with you every day and every night. So, I mean, you had two chances. Either get stretched and ran off or get good. I mean, that's all you had. And that's another thing that should be brought back to wrestling instead of trying to teach them in air-conditioned buildings and just take people's money and say, hey, you're a wrestler now. But,
unbelievable. The era we learned, Bo, is over. I mean, it'll never be. It can't go back. People say, well, can you bring it back? You can't bring it back because you don't have the talent.
No, you do not have the talent. And you don't even have the talent from the late 80s and early 90s when there were still a few territories left. I mean, it's gone. Do you think Australia, I look every now and again online and I see people are running wrestling in Australia, and it's kind of went back to what it was when you were there first breaking in. It's more clubs and smaller buildings, smaller towns, and do you think if an American or someone else, didn't have to be an American, but some outsider came to Australia and said, look, I got this many wrestlers from all over the world, do you think any TV station in Australia would give them a chance? I really don't know because I haven't been there in so long, and all the thing it was very primitive, just like Memphis. When you watch tapes from Memphis, you think, my God, this is the most primitive show I've ever seen. But what was happening in the ring? I mean, sometimes we didn't have a skirt on the ring. The freaking ring looked like it was falling down, and it was just, you know what I'm saying? So I really don't know. I don't know how high-tech they've got in Australia now. I don't know. It's all changed since I lived there. You know what I mean? It's just different. Well, they're still boxing in tents in the outback, so that part has not changed.
That boxing tent. Yeah, I saw that too, where that guy had been there. And I was on one of them shows for a little while too, and it was fun. Would I like to go back to it? No. Would I take anything for it? No. It was what I did for a little bit when I left the circus and did that. So yeah, I toured the outback. A lot of, it was fun, but I wouldn't want to do it now.
All right. So we got a few minutes left here, and I'm going to tell everybody here, Bill Dundee is a true wrestling legend. I don't care what part of the world you go to, everybody knows who Bill Dundee is from the Memphis Wrestling. It's amazing how those primitive wrestling tapes have got all over the world, Bill. And, I mean, people from everywhere know about them. You had Lance Russell on your show a few weeks ago, and he was talking about walking down the street in Las Vegas, and an Australian guy stopped him. He knew who he was from getting the tapes online and watching them in Australia. But, I think a big part of the wrestling history with Australia is missing is, technology and online and being able to go and look on YouTube. People are starting to catch up, but I think that's an important territory that people should remember. And if nothing else, just remember that, you know, how great it was for 20 years, and think about all the guys that came out of there that got to be seen worldwide, like yourself and O'Day and Gray and Barnes, that were just wrestling in clubs. And did you ever think all these years later you'd be sitting in Memphis, Tennessee?
No, not really, but after I got here I kind of did. But here's the thing, before we get off there, I'd like to tell you. Me and Laura had a hell of a run here. I mean, if you say Laura, you have to say Dundee. If you say Dundee, you have to say Laura. That's the damnedest thing. But here's the thing that I was talking to Randy about, or him, me, whatever. Me and George Barnes was here for about 16, 18 weeks together, and people still talk about him. So we had to make a big impact the first time we was here. I mean, I stayed the next 30-odd years, but George was only here for 16 weeks and got over like a son of a gun. I walk around Germantown here, and people talk to me, and they all still talk to Barnes. I mean, that's 35 years ago.
And I confirmed that with two years ago. You were here visiting me and Misty on Christmas. We went to Golden Corral to eat. Our waitress walked up and said, "Bill Dundee, where is George Barnes?" And
yes, it's
unbelievable. It truly is. And there's a few matches of you guys online that people can go look up on YouTube. George Barnes, Bill Dundee, a great team. Look it up. Also, I want to tell everybody, if you've not seen it, go find Bill Dundee's book. Bill, where can they buy your book at?
Oh, my website. You remember what it is? Yes, say it loud.
www.bill/superstar/Dundee/enterprises.com.
Well, thank you, Donna.
There you go.
Lovely Donna. Yeah, so.
You know, the guy that helped me write my book, my good friend Donnie Brandon, he said I am the most interesting person that he has ever met. And he asked me who is the most interesting person I know, and I say Bill Dundee. Because how could a kid grow up on a farm in Scotland, end up in Australia, and come to America and live the American dream? And along the way, work for the circus, wrestle in casinos and clubs, build refrigerators for a living, and end up being the superstar. So,
yeah, here's the thing that was different from and I know it's saying the King he beat Fargo for the King of Memphis. That's how he became the King of Memphis. Yeah. Big Bad John walked out on TV one Saturday morning and said, "If I'm going to be the bicentennial baby, this guy here is the superstar from now on." Now, the kids give themselves names. It doesn't really mean nothing what the hell to call themselves.
Because they don't, that's right. It doesn't fit them. They don't belong, you know.
No.
But it's great. We got about 1 minute left. Bill, I'm going to ask you to come back in a week or two. Maybe I'll talk to you off there, because I would like to talk about Mid-South wrestling and some history there that needs to be told that is not being told in the local Walmarts, Kmarts, and everywhere else that this DVD is being sold. But find Bill Dundee on Facebook, Bill Dundee Enterprises on his website. Buy this book. You will enjoy it. I read it in one day. I've known Bill Dundee for 25 years, and I learned stuff in the book about him that I never knew before. It's an entertaining read. It's a great read, and he'll sign it for you. And you also can get it anywhere you can see him wrestling live,